This week on Real Faith, we'll be reviewing the Steven Spielberg-directed historical drama, Lincoln, Disney's animated video arcade adventure, Wreck-It Ralph, and the latest installment in the 007 spy franchise, Skyfall, starring Daniel Craig. All that and more coming up on Real Faith, film reviews you can have faith in.
Euclid's first common notion is this: things which are equal to the same thing are equal to each other. That's a rule of mathematical reasoning. It's true because it works. Has done and always will do. In his book, Euclid says this is self-evident. You see, there it is, even in that 2,000-year-old book of mechanical law. It is a self-evident truth that things which are equal to the same thing are equal to each other.
Daniel Day-Lewis is terrific as our 16th president, but is Lincoln a self-evident must-see? Welcome, I'm Stephen Gridonis, film critic for the National Catholic Register and creator of DecentFilms.com.
And I'm David DeSerto, former reviewer for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops' Office for Film and Broadcasting. And this is Real Faith, the film review show where we look at movies through a Catholic lens. Well, here we are back again.
It's good to be back, and what a movie to start off with.
Well, you know, we've actually already had one Abraham Lincoln film this year,
That's
Abraham
right.
Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
This one's a little more historically accurate.
Yeah, and it gives you a little bit more history to sink your teeth into. Inspired by Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Doris Kearns Goodwin's 2005 biography, Team of Rivals, the film chronicles President Lincoln's uphill political battle to push the passage of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, during the closing days of the Civil War. Helping him in his cause are David Strathairn as Secretary of State William Seward, James Spader as W.N. Bilbo, an unscrupulous lobbyist, Tommy Lee Jones as abolitionist congressional firebrand Thaddeus Stevens, and Sally Field as First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln.
You know, this might sound funny at first, but in a way I almost think that Lincoln is a better movie than it would have been if Spielberg had made the movie that I kind of thought he was going to make and hoped he was going to make, and in a way I almost kind of still do. I mean, you've got Daniel Day-Lewis, possibly the greatest actor of his generation, creating this most iconic of American figures from the inside out. And we can't possibly know that the voice and the mannerisms are really authentic, but they're absolutely persuasive. And then you've got this fantastic cast and the production values and the scope that Steven Spielberg demands. And I wanted the ultimate Abraham Lincoln biopic. I wanted it all, from the Prairie Lawyer days to his first forays into politics, the Lincoln-Douglas debates, the run for the White House, the beginning of the Civil War, signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, all the great speeches, first inaugural, Gettysburg Address, second inaugural. Is that too much to ask?
Well, you know, this really isn't a biopic. I think intentionally telescoped the focus of the film down to those key pivotal days and weeks during which they were trying to pass the 13th Amendment. But I think in doing that, he succeeds in revealing a lot about the man behind the myth, you know, behind the stone monuments.
And I do think that in telling the story of an episode in Lincoln's life, this really could have been called the 13th Amendment rather than Lincoln. I do think it makes for a better story than the kind of sweeping biopic that I was kind of hoping to get. You know, as a result, what we get here really is kind of Lincoln as the finished product. We don't see Lincoln becoming this figure of reverence and legend. He really is, from the first moment that he appears in the battlefield with these two black soldiers kind of looking up at him with this hero worship and talking about their aspirations of the future. Then two white soldiers come up and suddenly they're all reciting the Gettysburg Address in tandem. This is not historically accurate. The Gettysburg Address was very widely unknown until after Lincoln's death. You are dealing with a figure who is so mythologized that he does slay vampires in modern day.
But you also get the humanity. You get an Abraham Lincoln who argues with his wife,
Yes.
who lays down, you know, next to his son and strokes his hair, an Abraham Lincoln who cries. The one thing that I felt was missing, a favorite quote of mine of Abraham Lincoln is when he said that he was often driven to his knees out of an overwhelming conviction that there was nowhere else to go. And I was missing during this seminal defining moment of his presidency that they really don't show how prayer life and his personal faith affected the decisions he made.
Lincoln was actually a very secular man. If he had any faith in God at all, it was generally a very deistic faith, belief in a God who didn't really intervene, although he did see the hand of God at work in some inarticulate way in his battle against slavery. He believed that God was against slavery, and it was that moral conviction that really drove him, and that's what we do see here. The movie really reveals that the battle over slavery was not fundamentally a legal battle, and it wasn't even fundamentally a military battle. It was ultimately a moral battle. Lincoln was against slavery because he believed it was wrong. And, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, as the movie makes clear, on dubious legal grounds as an exercise of his wartime powers, not in a sweeping for all time gesture. And so that's really and the movie makes it clear, that's the urgency of trying to get the 13th Amendment signed with the force of the Civil War behind it as the impetus.
And also the need for leadership that had the courage of its convictions. I mean, this was a guy who really put his entire legacy on the limb to do what he felt was right. And, there's a scene where he explains how he suspended habeas corpus and certain, First Amendment freedoms of speech to push this through.
There are certain ambiguities there, for sure.
It reminded me of the scene in Man for All Seasons when Thomas More says that, God created us to serve him in the tangles of his mind. And Abraham Lincoln really pushes and bends the limits of the law almost to the breaking point.
And that's one of the things I admire so much about this film. That in spite of the fact that there is this layer of mythology, this is a Steven Spielberg film. This is not a grittily historic kind of film, that we do see all of these characters thinking and arguing and debating like intelligent adults and men of their time. There is a sense that these are not people, they're men like us, and yet their world is not our world. And some people find that kind of thing dry and talky and boring, but to me there's nothing more fascinating.
And while it is a film about men and situations of its time, it also comes across as a very timeless and timely story. And what strikes me about the film is how fresh and contemporary some of the political scenes feel, the backroom deal making and the congressional banter, particularly coming off such a contentious election year. And the funny thing is, in the pivotal scene, it all comes down to Ohio again.
Yes, and the courage of Lincoln and the courage of Thaddeus Stevens, played by Tommy Lee Jones in the Senate, arguing passionately against slavery, really drove home for me that, this was not a war that was going to be won, at least in this context, just by changing popular opinion or by a culture battle. This required politicians of great courage who are really willing to go out on a limb. This is something that, in the pro-life movement, we don't have right now.
Yeah, absolutely. We need an Abraham Lincoln for our times. The film is rated PG-13. There's some intense battlefield scenes with some very, disturbing wartime images. There is some scattered language. But overall, this is a towering film about a towering figure, a powerful film that speaks to some themes just important in 2012 as they were in 1865.
It is a terrific film, and I have to give a shout out to one of my favorite films from last year, which almost plays as a sequel to this movie, The Conspirator, which is about the trial of a Catholic woman named Mary Surratt, who was accused in the conspiracy to assassinate Abraham Lincoln. Coming up after the break, it's game on for Wreck-It Ralph, and Bond, James Bond, is back in Skyfall. Next on Real Faith.
I don't want to be the bad guy anymore.
You can't mess with the program, Ralph.
You're not going turbo, are you?
Turbo? No, I'm not going turbo. Come on, guys. Is it turbo to want a friend? Or a medal? Or a piece of pie every once in a while? Is it turbo to want more out of life?
Yes.
Ralph, we get it. But we can't change who we are. And the sooner you accept that, the better off your game and your life will be.
Hey, one game at a time, Ralph.
Now let's close out with the bad guy affirmation.
Okay.
I'm bad, and that's good. I will never be good, and that's not bad. There's no one I'd rather be than me.
That cartoon character support group thing, we've seen that before. You know, Pixar's Brave, which came out this summer, which we both loved, is out on Blu-ray and DVD this week, but what about the latest from parent company Disney? Set inside the cyberspace of 20th century arcade games, Wreck-It Ralph stars John C. Reilly as the titular villain of a Donkey Kong-style game, who envies the celebrity and acceptance of his heroic nemesis, Fix-It Felix Jr., voiced by Jack McBrayer from 30 Rock. Striking out to prove that he can be more than a bad guy, Ralph journeys to other games, including Sugar Rush, a racing game like Mario Kart crossed with Candyland, where he teams up with would-be racer Vanellope von Schweetz, voiced by Sarah Silverman, and gets some help from Sergeant Tamara Calhoun, voiced by Jane Lynch, a hard-bitten but curvaceous commando from a first-person shooter game.
You know, Stephen, Pixar set the bar really high for family entertainment with Brave. Not only was it the best film of the summer, but it's been probably one of the best family films of recent memory. But Wreck-It Ralph actually had quite a bit going for it. It's executive produced by John Lasseter, who I know directed two other of your favorite films, Toy Story 1 and 2. It has a great look with real zippy, fun animation. But a lot like the Vanellope character, who's also called Glitch in the film, and has a bad habit of breaking up into HTML coding, narratively, this film just kind of falls apart from time to time.
You know, it does, and it's kind of disappointing. The Toy Story connection, I think, is particularly notable here because, once again, you've got a nostalgic homage to the playthings of our childhoods and the story of their lives when our backs are turned. And once again, some of them are real characters. You've got Pac-Man and Bowser from Super Mario Brothers and so forth. But the main characters are fictional creations that weren't really a part of anybody's childhood, although they kind of feel as though they could have. They've got the nostalgia right, they've got the tone right, and they play with different types of games. You've got the very different world of a Donkey Kong-style Wreck-It Ralph game versus the violent science fiction Halo-style first-person shooter game, Heroes Duty, and then you wind up in this super sweet world of Sugar Rush, the racing game. And so the premise is nice, but for some reason the characters don't quite click. And the second act really drags.
Yeah, this is not, Woody and Buzz Lightyear. And yes, it is fun with the sort of the generational differences. Is actually, I thought the funniest line in the film is when Ralph goes up to Calhoun and says, "Wow, look at your high definition." But, apart from the nostalgia, and again, this film has enough zaniness to entertain the kids, but I think its target audience is really the accompanying adults who sort of cut their gaming teeth playing these games in the 80s. There's not much there. Director Rich Moore does a very nice job at creating this cyber world, and I do give him credit for acknowledging that not all advancements are necessarily improvements, as when Ralph rhetorically asks, when did video games get so violent?
Right. It's not a complete waste of time. I won't say that I didn't enjoy it at all, but I think that what's ultimately lacking, what makes the Toy Story film special that this movie doesn't have, is a figure like Andy at the center to really care about these characters and make them real. Like the Velveteen Rabbit became real because he was loved. Here, the characters exist for the sake of human players, but none of the players matter. They just come and go.
Absolutely. I mean, I really think it's unfair to compare the two films in a way because the world, the environment, of a child's room has so much more emotional resonance than a kind of a seedy video arcade.
Wreck-It Ralph is rated PG for some mildly crude humor, double entendres, action violence, some scary imagery, pretty run-of-the-mill stuff these days.
The short that preceded the film is definitely worth the price of admission. It's a sweet romance called Paperman that will charm adults, though it may fly over the heads of children.
Absolutely, it's fantastic, and that's something I have to give credit to Pixar for, is reviving that tradition of the short animated films. Even when the feature film is disposable, very often the short that precedes it is much better.
Well, from vintage video games to a classic super spy, in Skyfall, 007 is back in Her Majesty's Secret Service. But does it have a license to thrill?
I won't miss next time, Mr. Silver.
Not bad. Not bad, James, for a physical wreck.
Why, thank you.
You caught me. Now, here's your prize. The latest thing from my local toy store. It's called Radio.
I do hope that wasn't for me.
But that is.
Don't you hate it when they drop a train on you? I hate it when that happens. This is the 23rd Bond film now, the third film for Daniel Craig, so is 3 times the charm. Here, Craig's 007 is on the trail of Javier Bardem Silva, an international cyber terrorist bent on revenge, who's stolen a computer file compromising the safety of every agent in NATO. Directed by Sam Mendes, the film features a British cast including Judi Dench, returning as M for the 6th time, Ben Whishaw taking over as Gadget Man Q, Ralph Fiennes as a chairman of British intelligence, and Naomi Harris and Berenice Marlowe as the requisite Bond girls.
Well, it took 22 previous films, but we finally found out. Who knew? James Bond not only is descended from Catholics, but Reformation-era Catholic recusants. The final act of this film takes place in Bond's ancestral home in the Scottish Highlands, and within their estate there is a priest hole from the Reformation era that plays a prominent role.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, that connection between James Bond and Catholic recusantry, if you can believe it, has a prior history. Many people know that the name James Bond, Ian Fleming got from the author of a book on ornithology, of all things. But there's another Bond connection in Ian Fleming's past, a family of Catholic Bonds from Dorset who do have that history of recusantry, who did, from that era in the Reformation of Catholic resistors when Catholics in England had to build priest holes. And this family of Bonds' family motto was Orbis non suffici, the world is not enough, which Ian Fleming made the family crest, the family motto of James Bond himself in the books, and which of course became the title of one of the movies starring Pierce Brosnan.
You know, early in the film, one character tells a bruised and battered James Bond that there's no shame in admitting that you've lost a step. You know, after 22 Bond films, I can say that this franchise really hasn't lost a step. You know, part of me does miss the goofy camp of the Bond films of yesteryear, but taking into account the 3 Craig Bond films, I found this film one of the smartest and most satisfying.
I really enjoyed Skyfall. My favorite is still Casino Royale, the first Daniel Craig film, and I can really only discuss this film in the context of the Craig films. The franchise has done away with the camp. It's done away significantly with the nostalgia, although that's back in this film with the sentimentalism. But what this film has done is it's rehumanized Bond in a way that I didn't think was possible after Casino Royale. What I love about Casino Royale is that it's the ultimate James Bond origin story, and it's really the story of how Bond lost his soul, how he went from being a blunt instrument and a flawed human being, which he already was, to just being something that was cold and dead inside. Here, the movie actually finds a way to humanize him again in a defining relationship with a woman, but not with a love interest, with Judi Dench's M, who becomes a maternal figure, and that really plays out in some powerful ways that turn him into a human being.
And it also fills in some of the holes of even the backstory further on from his childhood. You know, bringing him back to his ancestral home, introducing a caretaker character played by Albert Finney, who, by the way, when his entrance is there and you just see his feet, I think the whole audience, would have erupted if it had been Sean Connery.
You know, they actually talked about Sean Connery, but they decided it would have been a distraction. What Sam Mendes has done here is really fantastic. He's brought together a lot of really strong elements. There are some tremendous action scenes, as there always is. Wonderful villain played by Javier Bardem, adding another villainous character
kind
under
of a
his
cross
belt.
between the Joker and Hannibal Lecter. And I think in The Villain, it really introduces some interesting questions, a more depth that we haven't seen in James Bond's films about the nature of national security in the age of global terror, and raises some questions about his patriotism outdated. This, kind of like the Bourne films, is really a thinking man's action film, although, as you said, it has some great action sequences. I mean, we've seen some rooftop chases, but never on motorcycles. And there's a great shadow play fight sequence played out against a neon-drenched Shanghai skyscraper.
And that Shanghai sequence is absolutely a standout. Roger Deakins is going to get a nomination. This year, he may actually win.
Yeah, it has a very contemporary, hip feel. But as you said, I think it's also hearkening back for a sort of a sense of retro nostalgia. From the opening credits, when they have the old school credits where they show the entire production staff before the opening of the film.
I do have to say that the retro feel fails in one respect for me. One of the Bond girls is a character who we discover has a very tragic backstory involving sexual trafficking and exploitation and so forth. And Bond really isn't any better to her than anybody else, and unfortunately her story doesn't get much better. I think that was a misstep on the part of the film. I think it's really contrary to the tone of fun and humanity that they were trying to bring and succeeded in bringing in most of the film.
Mentioning the Bond girl, obviously there are the unfortunate, morally problematic trysts with those Bond girls. The film is rated PG-13 for some action violence and some scattered language. Obviously it's not for children, but for Bond fans, I think we both agree it's one of the better installments.
Yeah, I don't know if they'll ever make another film that quite lives up to the high standard set by Casino Royale, but I am looking forward to Bond 24. On deck, the first in a series of Christmas movies with a message. Stay tuned for more Real Faith. Welcome back. As we'll be doing each week, it's time to spotlight another movie with a message. Serving as our guide will be Father Robert Lauder, who runs the popular Friday Film Festival at the Immaculate Conception Center in Douglaston.
Up first, a Christmas classic from 1947, with the dapper angel and perhaps the most memorable tree trimming scene ever. Father Lauder, it's all yours.
Thanks, guys. For this holiday season, we're going to do movies with a message and a Christmas theme. And we've come up with, I think, some really terrific films. The first one is the 1947 The Bishop's Wife, starring Cary Grant, Loretta Young, and David Niven. All three terrific performers. Now, when this movie first came out in 1947, the trailer was interesting. Cary Grant, Loretta Young, and David Niven appeared, and they started to talk about the film. This is called The Bishop's Wife. And David Niven says, yes, and I play the bishop. And Loretta Young said, yes, and I play the bishop's wife. And Cary Grant said, yes, and I play, and Loretta Young said, shh. And so you knew it was something secretive about Cary Grant's role. As a matter of fact, he plays an angel named Dudley. And he comes down to earth to help the bishop who's having a real problem preaching the gospel. He is being pressured by people who donate large sums of money, and they're kind of taking over the church. And the angel's been sent down to earth to help him. Now, David Niven in the 1950s became extremely popular. He's quite good in this movie. And I've gotten into the habit of watching Turner Classic Movies, and I'm amazed at how many movies in the 1930s Loretta Young made. She only won one Academy Award, and that was for The Farmer's Daughter. And Cary Grant never won an Academy Award. I think Cary Grant in light comedy is unbeatable. I also think in the Hitchcock movies he made, Notorious, To Catch a Thief, North by Northwest, Suspicion. He made at least 4 with Hitchcock. He's very good in those. But there is one scene in this film which is quite funny. He takes Loretta Young skating, and it's obvious that this is not Loretta Young skating, but it's even more obvious that it is not Cary Grant. I showed this film at a film festival, and in this scene, everybody started laughing because the filmmaker didn't even seem to try to conceal the fact that this was not Cary Grant skating. Now, in the crucial scene, Cary Grant, as the angel, rewrites David Niven's Christmas sermon. And when David Niven gives it, it has a terrific impact on everybody, including some of the people who are kind of putting pressure on him and taking over the control. This is a really warm-hearted film. If we wanted to pinpoint a message, it would be, caring about one another, being interested in one another. The way they've structured the film, after Cary Grant has helped David Niven, he leaves, and nobody will remember that he was ever there. There's one scene in which he seems to be falling in love with Loretta Young, but his sense of duty prevails, and he realizes, this is not his mission. He's supposed to be helping people. So, at the end of the film, that everybody has been touched by Dudley, everybody has been helped by him, but none of them are going to remember this. And like Loretta Young is not going to remember that she was attracted, she's not even going to remember that there was an angel, and neither would David Niven. In terms of this whole list of Christmas films, I would say this one is really special. I guarantee you will enjoy it.
This film was actually remade in 1996 under the title The Preacher's Wife,
Yes.
starring Denzel Washington and Whitney Houston. One little known fact is that Cary Grant was actually considered for the lead in another Christmas classic, It's a Wonderful Life. He was up for the role of George Bailey.
So glad that worked out the way it did.
As it turned out, he got to star in this film, both out in the same year, 1947. But he would have played a man who was helped by an angel as opposed to an angel who ends up helping a man.
Yeah, and I just have to say that I know this is a Christmas classic, and I may be the only person who has a hard time with it, but the idea of Cary Grant as an angel just seems so wrong to me somehow, and it plays into Hollywood's tendency to just never get angels right. Just once, I'd like to see a movie that actually takes the idea of angels seriously and tries to give them their due.
Yeah, Loretta Young, as beautiful as she was, desiring earthly goods after experiencing the beatific vision doesn't make much sense. One thing I do like about this film, though, is how it connects his sort of spiritual inertia with his marital malaise and the idea that your relationship with God does affect your relationship with everyone around you. But I have to say my favorite line in the film, and it really works because of Grant's comedic ability, is at one point Loretta Young says, "Oh, Dudley, I never know when you're joking." And Cary Grant responds, "I'm never more serious than when I'm joking." And it just calls to mind that marvelous quote from C.S. Lewis when he said, "Joy is the serious business of heaven."
That also reminds me of Chesterton saying that angels can fly because
they take themselves lightly.
Yeah, and I have to say I know I'm in the minority on this film, and viewers probably will enjoy it despite my misgivings.
And now to recap this week's movie reviews. Steven Spielberg's Lincoln is a towering achievement with Oscar-worthy performances, handsome production value, and timely themes about the courage of conviction and moral leadership that speaks to our own politically divided age.
Despite spot-on nostalgia and visual flair, Wreck-It Ralph falls short on characterization and emotional appeal. Though not a complete waste of time, it's more disposable than one would hope for from a Disney movie with Toy Story echoes in the age of John Lasseter. In the annals of James Bond, Skyfall soars high, with a winning blend of spectacular action, a terrific villain, dazzling visuals, and a surprisingly personal glimpse into Bond's past and his relationship with Judi Dench's M.
Join us in 2 weeks when we'll be reviewing the finale of the Twilight Saga, Breaking Dawn Part 2, the animated family adventure Rise of the Guardians, and director Ang Lee's Lost at Sea Odyssey, Life of Pi. From all of us to all of you, have a great Thanksgiving.
And join us back here in 2 weeks for our next episode.
Until then, I'm David DeSerto.
And I'm Stephen Gradanis, and that's a wrap on Real Faith.